Hi team, welcome back to Budgetary Policy. In this video, we're going to look at public debt. So we're trying to understand how the government utilises a surplus or what it needs to do in order to maintain a deficit. And we would like to understand the relationship between the budget outcome and the level of government debt. Okay, so please go back to the previous video. Make sure you've got yourself across what a government budget deficit or surplus is. And the new bit of terminology now is this use of government or public debt, which really just represents the amount of money that the Australian government owes to investors or to other countries from which it has borrowed money. Okay, so we want to understand, how does the government finance a budget deficit? We're going to start to talk about bonds again. So we talked about treasury bonds with respect to those being issued by the Reserve Bank of Australia to engage in open market operations. The idea here is similar, except instead of the bonds being issued by the RBA, they're being issued by the government. Okay, so the government makes a decision as to how much money it needs to raise in order to finance the budget deficit. It creates bonds to the value of that number, and then it issues them. So what I mean by that is it then goes to the market and it sells it to either Australian or international investors, and those investors are incentivized to purchase those bonds because, once again, they know that they're going to be paid an annual rate of return depending on the type of bond that they buy. So low risk, low reward, better alternative than leaving your money sitting in the bank. So there is an incentive for investors to purchase bonds because ultimately there's something in it from them. And then once the government has obviously issued these bonds, they're able to raise that money in order to finance the budget deficit. Okay, so the Australian government issues bonds to the Australian international investors. The sale of the bonds allows for governments to raise funds to cover the deficit. So it creates debt for the government, okay, which leads to an increase in the overall level of public debt. So if you think about the government right now, they're going to have a certain level of public debt. Give it 12 more months. If they then decide to run another, or they have to run another government budget deficit and, issue bonds in order to finance that deficit, they're going to be creating debt. And that debt is going to be added to the historical debt. And basically it means that the level of public debt that the government has is going to increase, okay? So the idea here, guys, is you need to be able to tell a story that links budget deficits to the increase in public debt. And this is your reason why and obviously how that operates. The flip side of that is, what does the government then do with a budget surplus? Surplus being that they have more revenue than expenses for that year. You can probably guess what they're going to do with it. So when revenues are greater than expenses, the government has a surplus of cash. This surplus is generally used to repay existing public debt. Okay, so if you owe someone money and you come into some money, obviously you're going to use that money to pay off your debt. The government's doing the same thing here. And so the repayment of public debt leads to a decrease in the overall level of public debt or government debt. Just to clarify, public debt, government debt, exactly the same thing, okay? Those two terms are interchangeable, so don't get confused. One doesn't lead to the other. They are, in essence, the same thing. So once again, guys, the story that you want to be able to tell here is how does a budget surplus facilitate that decrease in public debt? Make sure you can tell that story. And that's it. Thank you.